Good evening, good afternoon, and certainly it's not midnight, so I can't say good day. It is day 6 of the International Great Black Read Aloud, day 2023, and this is our sixth installment. My name is LD Robinson, and I am just elated to be with you on day 6 and to be with you a lot earlier in the day here on East Coast time in the United States of America. Here at the International Great Black Read Aloud Day, we are giving voice to words written by Black people all around the world. And we want you to help us spread the word, help us share the good news of literacy, and that Black authors are great contributors to world literature. And we also want you to subscribe because if you haven't subscribed to our website, we want to invite you to do so. And we want you to partake in all of the fun that we are having each day as we share literature from authors all across the African diaspora. And today we are excited because our genre today is raising children. And we're kind of doing a little reverse raising children. So it's kind of this one is kind of through the eyes of an adult. And we are very excited about our selection today. And our selection today here on day 6 is Dreams from My Father by Barack Obama. And I think he has made our list. I don't know. I think he made it last year as well, and perhaps the year before. So we are back with Mr. Barack Obama, and um, in his book Dreams from My Father, we're going to start from chapter 1. A few months after my 21st birthday, and I want to make sure I put this on the screen that it is day 6 and that it is about raising children and our selection for the day. A few months after my 21st birthday, a stranger called to give me the news. I was living in New York at the time, on 94th between 2nd and 1st, part of that unnamed shipping border between East Harlem and the rest of Manhattan. It was an uninviting block, treeless and barren, lined with soot colored walk ups that cast heavy shadows for most of the day. The apartment was small, with slanting floors and irregular heat and a buzzer downstairs that didn't work, so that visitors had to call ahead from a payphone at the corner gas station, where a black Doberman the size of a wolf paced through the night in vigilant patrol, its jaws clamped around an empty beer bottle. None of this concerned me much, for I didn't get many visitors. I was impatient in those days, busy with work and unrealized plans, and prone to see other people as unnecessary distractions. It wasn't that I didn't appreciate company exactly. I enjoyed exchanging Spanish pleasantries with my mostly Puerto Rican neighbors, and on my way back from classes, I usually stopped to talk to the boys who hung on the stoop all summer long about the Knicks or the gunshots they'd heard the night before. When the weather was good, my roommate and I might sit on the fire escape to smoke cigarettes and study the dusk washing blue over the city, or watch white people from the better neighborhoods nearby walk their dogs down our block to let the animals blank on our curbs. Scoop the poop, you bastards. My roommate would shout with impressive rage, and we'd laugh at the faces of both master and beast, grim and unapologetic as they hunkered down to do the deed. I enjoyed such moments, but only in brief. If the talk began to wander across the border into familiarity, I would soon find reason to excuse myself. I had grown too comfortable in my solitude, the safest place I knew. I remember there was an old man living next door who seemed to share my disposition. He lived alone, a gaunt, stooped figure who wore a heavy black overcoat and a misshapen fedora on those rare occasions when he left his apartment. Once in a while, I'd run into him on his way back from the store, and I would offer to carry his groceries up the long flight of stairs. He would look at me and shrug, and we would begin our ascent, stopping at each landing so that he could catch his breath. When we finally arrived at his apartment, excuse me, I carefully set the bags down on the floor and he would offer a courtly nod of acknowledgement before shuffling inside and closing the latch. Not a single word would pass between us, and not once did he ever thank me for my efforts. The old man's silence impressed me. I thought him a kindred spirit. Later, my roommate would find him crumpled up on the third floor landing, his eyes wide open, his limbs stiff, and curled up like a baby's. A crowd gathered. A few of the women crossed themselves, and the smaller children whispered with excitement. Eventually, the paramedics arrived to take away the body, and the police let themselves into the old man's apartment. It was neat, almost empty. A chair, a desk, the faded portrait of a woman with heavy eyebrows, and a gentle smile set atop the mantelpiece. Somebody opened the refrigerator and found close to $1,000 in small bills rolled up inside wads of old newspaper and carefully arranged behind mayonnaise and pickle jars. The loneliness of the scene affected me, and for the briefest moment I wish I had learned the old man's name. Then, almost immediately, I regretted my desire, along with its companion, grief. I felt as if an understanding had been broken between us, as if, in that barren room, the old man was whispering an untold history, telling me things I preferred not to hear. It must have been a month or so later, on a cold, dreary November morning, the sun faint behind a gauze of clouds, that the other call came. I was in the middle of making myself breakfast, with coffee on the stove and 2 eggs in the skillet, when my roommate handed me the phone. The line was thick with static. Barry, Barry, is this you? Yes, who's this? Yes, Barry, this is your Aunt Jane in Nairobi. Can you hear me? I'm sorry, who did you say you were? Aunt Jane, listen, Barry, your father is dead. He is killed in a car accident. Hello, can you hear me? I say your father is dead. Barry, please call your uncle in Boston and tell him. I can't talk now, okay, Barry? I will try to call you again. That was all. The line cut off, and I sat on the couch, smelling eggs burned in the kitchen, staring at cracks in the plaster, trying to measure my loss. At the time of his death, my father remained a myth to me, both more and less than a man. He had left Hawaii back in 1963 when I was only 2 years old, so that as a child I knew him only through the stories that my mother and grandparents told. They all had their favorites, each one seamless, burnished smooth from repeated use. I can still picture Gramps leaning back in his old stuffed chair after dinner, sipping whiskey and cleaning his teeth with the cellophane from his cigarette pack, recounting the time that my father almost threw a man off the Poly Lookout because of a pipe. See, your mom and dad, excuse me, see, your mom and dad had decided to take this friend of his sightseeing around the island. So they drove up to the lookout, and Barack was probably on the wrong side of the road the whole way over there. Your father was a terrible driver, my mother explains to me. He'd end up on the left-hand side, the way the British drive. And if you said something, he'd just huff about silly American rules. Well, this particular time, they arrived in one piece, and they got out and stood at the railing to admire the view. And Barack, he was puffing away on this pipe that I'd given him for his birthday, pointing out all the sights with the stem like a sea captain. Your father was really proud of this pipe, my mother interrupts again. He smoked it all night while he studied, and sometimes, look, Ann, do you want to tell the story, or are you going to let me finish? Sorry, Dad, go ahead. Anyway, this poor fella, he was another African student, wasn't he? Fresh off the boat. This poor kid must have been impressed with the way Barack was holding forth with his pipe, because he asked if he could give it a try. Your dad thought about it for a minute and finally agreed, and as soon as the fella took his first puff, he started coughing up a fit. Coughed so hard that the pipe slipped out of his hand and dropped over the railing 100 feet down the face of the cliff. Gramps stops to take another nip from his flask before continuing. Well, now your dad was gracious enough to wait until his friend stopped coughing before he told him to climb over the railing and bring the pipe back. The man took one peek down this 90-degree incline and told Barack that he'd buy him a replacement. Quite sensibly, Toot says from the kitchen. We call my grandmother Tutu, Toot for short. It means grandparent in Hawaiian, for she decided on the day I was born that she was still too young to be called Granny. Gramps scowls but decides to ignore her. I want to pause right here and say that I know some people who think they're too young to be called Granny too, so they have other names. But Barack was adamant about getting his pipe back because it was a gift and couldn't be replaced. So the fella took another look and shook his head again, and that's when your dad picked him clear off the ground and started dangling him over the railing. Gramps lets out a hoot and gives his knee a jovial slap. As he laughs, I imagine myself looking up at my father, dark against the brilliant sun, the transgressor's arms flailing about as he's held aloft, a fearsome vision of justice. He wasn't really holding him over the railing, Dad, my mother says, looking to me with concern. But Gramps takes another sip of whiskey and plows forward. At this point, other people were starting to stare, and your mother was begging Barack to stop. I guess Barack's friend was just holding his breath and saying his prayers. Anyway, after a couple of minutes, your dad set the man down on his feet, patted him on the back, and suggested, calm as you please, that they all go find themselves a beer. And don't you know, that's how your dad acted for the rest of the tour, like nothing happened. Of course, your mother was still pretty upset when they got home. In fact, she was barely talking to your dad. Barack wasn't helping matters any either, because when your mother tried to tell us what happened, he just shook his head and started to laugh. Relax, Anna, he said to her. Your dad had this deep baritone, see, and this British accent. My grandfather tucks his chin into his neck at this point to capture the full effect. Relax, Anna, he said. I only wanted to teach the chap a lesson about the proper care of other people's property. Gramps would start to laugh again until he started to cough, and Toot would mutter under her breath that she supposed it was a good thing that my father had realized that dropping the pipe had just been an accident because who knows what might have happened otherwise, and my mother would roll her eyes at me and say they were exaggerating. Your father can be a bit domineering, my mother would admit with a hint of a smile, but it's just that he is basically a very honest person that makes him uncompromising sometimes. She preferred a gentler portrait of my father. She would tell the story of when he arrived to accept his Phi Beta Kappa key in his favorite outfit, jeans and an old knit shirt with a leopard print pattern. Nobody told him it was this big honor, so he walked in and found everyone standing around this elegant room dressed in tuxedos, the only time I ever saw him embarrassed. And Gramps, suddenly thoughtful, would start nodding to himself. It's a fact bar, he would say. Your dad could handle just about any situation, and that made everybody like him. Remember the time he had to sing at the International Music Festival? He'd agreed to sing some African songs, but when he arrived, it turned out to be this big to do, and the woman who performed just before him was a semi professional singer, a Hawaiian gal with a full band to back her up. Anyone else would have stopped right there, and explained that there had been a mistake, but not Barack. He got up and started singing in front of this big crowd, which is no easy feat, let me tell you. And he wasn't great, but he was so sure of himself that before you knew it, he was getting as much applause as anybody. My grandfather would shake his head and get out of his chair to flip on the TV set. Now there's something you can learn from your dad, he would tell me. Confidence, the secret to a man's success. And I am going to I'm going to skip ahead and read this section from chapter 6. I spent my first night in Manhattan curled up in an alleyway. It wasn't intentional. While still in LA, I had heard that a friend of a friend would be vacating her apartment in Spanish Harlem, near Columbia, and that given New York's real estate market, I'd better grab it while I could. An agreement was reached. I wired ahead with the date of my August arrival, and after dragging my luggage through the airport, the subways, Times Square, and across 109th, from Broadway to Amsterdam, I finally stood at the door a few minutes past 10 p.m. I pressed the buzzer repeatedly, but no one answered. The street was empty, the buildings on either side boarded up, a bulk of rectangular shadows. Eventually, a young Puerto Rican woman emerged from the building, throwing a nervous look my way before heading down the street. I rushed to catch the door before it slammed shut, and pulling my luggage behind me, proceeded upstairs to knock, and then bang on the apartment door. Again, no answer, just a sound down the hall of a deadbolt being thrown into place. New York, just like I pictured it. I checked my wallet, not enough money for a motel. I knew one person in New York, a guy named Sadiq, whom I'd met in LA, but he told me that he worked all night at a bar somewhere. With nothing to do but wait, I carried my luggage back downstairs and sat on the stoop. After a while, I reached into my back pocket, pulling out the letter I'd been carrying since leaving LA. Dear son, it was such a pleasant surprise to hear from you after so long. I am fine and doing all the things which you know are expected of me in this country. I just came back from London where I was attending to government business, negotiating finances, etc. In fact, it is because of too much travel that I rarely write to you. In any case, I think I shall do better from now on. You will be pleased to know that all your brothers and sisters here are fine, and send their greetings. Like me, they approve of your decision to come home after graduation. When you come, we shall together decide on how long you may wish to stay. Barry, even if it is only for a few days, the important thing is that you know your people and also that you know where you belong. Please look after yourself and say hello to your mom, Tutu, and Stanley. I hope to hear from you soon. Love, Dan. I folded the letter along its seams and stuffed it back into my pocket. It hadn't been easy to write him. Our correspondence had all but died over the past 4 years. In fact, I had gone through several drafts, crossing out lines, struggling for the appropriate tone, resisting the impulse to explain too much. Dear Father, dear Dad, dear Dr. Obama. And now he had answered me, cheerful and calm. Know where you belong, he advised. He made it sound simple, like calling directory assistants. Information, what city, please? I'm not sure. I was hoping you could tell me. The name's Obama. Where do I belong? Maybe it was really that simple for him. I imagine my father sitting at his desk in Nairobi, a big man in government, with clerks and secretaries bringing him papers to sign, a minister calling him from it for advice, a loving wife and children waiting at home, his own father's village a day's drive away. The image made me vaguely angry, and I tried to set it aside, concentrating instead on the sound of salsa coming from an open window somewhere down the block. The same thoughts kept returning to me, though, as persistent as the beat of my heart. Where did I belong? My conversation with Regina that night after the rally might have triggered a change in me, left me with warm, good intentions, left me warm with good intentions. But I was like a drunk coming out of a long, painful binge, and I soon felt my newfound resolve slipping away without object or direction. 2 years from graduation, I had no idea what I was going to do with my life or even where I would live. Hawaii lay behind me like a childhood dream. I could no longer imagine settling there. Whatever my father might say, I knew it was too late to ever truly claim Africa as my home. And if I had come to understand myself as a black American and was understood as such, that understanding remained unanchored to place. What I needed was a community, I realized, a community that cut deeper than the common despair that black friends and I shared when reading the latest crime statistics or the high fives I might exchange on a basketball court, a place where I could put down stakes and test my commitments. And so, when I heard about a transfer program that Occidental had arranged with Columbia University, I'd been quick to apply. I figured that if there were any more black students at Columbia than there were at Oxy, I'd at least be in the heart of a true city with black neighborhoods in close proximity. As it was, there wasn't much in LA to hold me back. Most of my friends were graduating that year. Hassan off to work with his family in London, Regina on her way to Andalusia to study Spanish gypsies. And Marcus? I wasn't sure what had happened to Marcus. He should have had one more year left, but something had gotten to him midway through his junior year, something that I recognized, even if I couldn't quite name it. I thought back to one evening sitting with him in the library before he decided to drop out of school. An Iranian student, an older balding man with a glass eye, was sitting across the table from us, and he had noticed Marcus reading a book on the economics of slavery. Although the drift of his eye gave the Iranian a menacing look, he was a friendly and curious man, and eventually he leaned over the table and asked Marcus a question about the book. Tell me, please, the man said. How do you think such a thing as slavery was such Tell me, please, the man said. How do you think such a thing as slavery was permitted to last for so many years? White people don't see us as human beings, Marcus said. Simple as that. Most of them still don't. Yes, I see. But what I mean to ask is, why didn't black people fight? They did fight. Nat Turner, Denmark Vesey. Slave rebellions, the Iranian interrupted. Yes, I have read something about them. These were the very brave men. But they were so few, you see. Had I been a slave, watching these people do what they did to my wife, my children, well, I would have preferred death. This is what I don't understand. Why so many men did not fight at all. Until death, you see. I looked at Marcus, waiting for him to answer, but he remained silent, his face not angry as much as withdrawn, eyes fastened to a spot on the table. His lack of response confused me, but after a pause, I took up the attack, asking the Iranian if he knew the names of the untold thousands who had leaped into shark infested waters before their prison ships had ever reached American ports. Asking if, once the ships had landed, he would have still preferred death had he known that revolt might only visit more suffering on women and children. Was the collaboration of some slaves any different than the silence of some Iranians who stood by and did nothing as Savak thugs murdered and tortured opponents of the Shah? How could we judge other men until we had stood in their shoes? This last remark seemed to catch the man off guard, and Marcus finally rejoined the conversation, repeating one of Malcolm X's old saws about the difference between house Negroes and field Negroes. But he spoke as if he weren't convinced of his own words, and after a few minutes, he abruptly stood up and walked toward the door. We never did talk about that conversation, Marcus and I. Maybe it didn't explain anything. There were more than enough reasons for someone like Marcus to feel restless in a place like Occidental. I know that in the months that followed, I began to notice changes in him, as if he were haunted by specters that had seeped through the cracks of our safe, sunny world. Initially, he became more demonstrative in his racial pride. He took to wearing African prints to class and started lobbying the administration for an all black dormitory. Later, he grew uncommunicative. He began to skip classes, hitting the reefer more heavily. He let his beard grow out, let his hair work its way into dreadlocks. Finally, he told me that he was going to take a leave from school for a while. Need a break from this, he said. We were walking through a park in Compton, hanging out at an all-day festival there. It was a beautiful afternoon, everybody in shorts, children screeching as they ran through the grass, but Marcus seemed distracted and barely spoke. Only when we passed a group of bongo players did he seem to come to life. We sat beside them under a tree, transfixed by the sound, watching the dark, barely cupped hands dance low off the hide. After a while, I started to get bored and wandered off to talk to a pretty young woman selling meat pies. When I returned, Marcus was still there, except he was playing now, his long legs crossed, borrowed bongos nestling in his lap. Through the haze of smoke that surrounded him, his face was expressionless. His eyes were narrow, as if he were trying to shut out the sun. For almost an hour, I watched him play without rhythm or nuance, just pounding the hell out of those drums, beating back untold memories. And right then I realized that Marcus needed my help as much as I needed his, that I wasn't the only one searching for answers. I looked down now at the abandoned New York street. Did Marcus know where he belonged? Did any of us? Where were the fathers, the uncles and grandfathers who could help explain this gash in our hearts? Where were the healers who might help us rescue meaning from defeat? They were gone, vanished, swallowed up by time. Only their cloudy images remained, and they once a year letters full of dime store advice. This has been this has been our selection for today here at the International Great Black Read Aloud Day. And our subject for today is raising children. And we've kind of taken a little reverse look by looking at our selection for today, which is Dreams from My Father by Barack Obama, and an excellent retro look at parenting and what he got from his father and his mother and his grandparents. It's a very interesting story. It's a multi-continent story. And so if you get a chance, certainly read Dreams from My Father. Well, this is our conclusion for day 6. And as always, we want to remind you that we are partners with Fresh Book Festival, and we want you to join us this year for Fresh Book Festival 2023. And we'll put up the information for you. Fresh Book Festival will be held, Fresh Book Festival, that is, will be held February 23rd through, we're looking here. It looks like we got a little delay here for our banner to come up. But anyway, Fresh Book Festival will be held February 23rd through the 25th in Daytona Beach, Florida. And we want you to be there. The first night is the Fresh Film Festival, which is hosted by Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, and in conjunction with the city of Daytona Beach, who sponsors, there it is. It took a little while for it to come up. The city of Daytona Beach is a sponsor of Fresh Book Festival. And so days 24th and 25th will be in Midtown at the Julia T. and Charles W. Cherry Cultural and Educational Center, recently renamed in their honor. And so we will see you February 23rd through the 25th at Fresh Book Festival in Daytona Beach. Also, we want you to like and share our broadcast. And so if you get a chance, we want you to join us. Subscribe, as we've asked you to do if you haven't already. And we also want you to share. And if you share one of our broadcasts, you will get an opportunity to win a Tig Brad t-shirt. We're giving away 10 t-shirts with our logo on it, and it will be a wonderful t-shirt that you can advertise your commitment to literacy as a legacy, and that you are part of where we give voice to words written by Black people all around the world. And that is the International Great Black Read Aloud Day. And this is edition 2023. This is our 3rd year, and we're excited to be here with you. It's been a little long today, but we're also earlier today. And for that, I am thankful. Again, like and share this broadcast, and we'll be checking if you share it, and we will enter your name into a contest to win a Tig Brad t-shirt. So we will see you tomorrow, where our selection for tomorrow is day 7, and it's about marriage. And so we will be back with a selection by an author, a Black author, on the subject of marriage. Again, my name is LD Robinson, and we will see you tomorrow for the International Great Black Read Aloud Day 2023. Have a good night.